And joining us now on the debate, in the nation's capital, James Bissett, former director of the Canadian Immigration Service and a longtime Canadian diplomat. And here in studio, Atif Kabursi, professor of economics at McMaster University, and David Garson, immigration lawyer with Guberman, Garson, Bush. And as I welcome everybody to the studio here tonight, we are going to continue our discussion about immigration, the changes that the federal parliament has in mind. Diane Finley, the immigration minister we just heard from, and I want to, first of all, get a sense from the three of you as to whether or not you agree with her that the system requires a major overhaul. James Bissett in the nation's capital, what say you?
Well, I entirely agree with the minister. It's a long overdue and badly needed fix of a system that's needed fixing for a long time. We've got almost 1 million people outside of Canada who've met all of the requirements, have paid their fees, and they're waiting to come here. In addition to that, we're getting thousands of applications submitted every day from people who meet our selection criteria. You can't keep people waiting for up to 6 years to get a visa to come here after they've met the requirements and have paid the fees. It's unfair. And the minister is absolutely right in trying to step in and correct the situation.
Okay, just by way of comparison then, when you were running the system back in the 1970s, how many people were in the backlog and what was the average wait?
Well, we didn't really allow a backlog to build up, not a considerable one, because we had a system of turning on the tap and turning it off. In other words, the selection criteria in those days had a valve in it that you could manipulate and ensure that the flow of immigrants came in to meet the labor force requirements, and that you had the power to slow it down if too many people were coming. If, for example, you were facing fairly large unemployment, you could turn the tap off. If you were in danger of slipping into a recession, you slowed it down. The current system is incapable of doing that. You now have countries like China, India, the Philippines, Korea, who are sending most of the immigrants to Canada. India and China have over 1 billion people each, and you would find in each of those countries probably several million people who can meet our selection criteria. And that's what's happening. The system is just overloaded, and there's no means of turning it off.
Okay, that's 2 votes in favor of
what the minister wants to do.
2 votes in favor of a major overhaul. David Garson, what do you say?
I would agree. Realistically speaking, the system does need a major overhaul. The problem that I have, and possibly other individuals may have, is the way that it's being done. We live in a rule of law, we live in a democracy. The minister has inserted her instructions to change the system within a budget bill that the government well knows, if it is voted against, will bring down the government, and the other 2 political parties, therefore, have to make the decision whether they're going to bring down a government over immigration provisions.
Okay, that's politics, though. Let's keep politics aside for the moment and just talk about the specifics of what she's got planned.
I think that we need a market-driven immigration system. There's no doubt in my mind that the system is broken and needs to be fixed. These 900,000 people that are sitting in the backlog are patiently waiting, or they may not be waiting. We don't know, because as of yet, to the best of my knowledge, we haven't even called the backlog to determine who's still there and who isn't. So for all we know, those 900,000 people are 400,000 people or 100,000 people. So realistically speaking, yes, we do need to do something, not only for the protection of the country, but for the protection of the immigrants themselves.
Okay, Atif Kabursi, this is more than just an academic discussion for you, because 40 years ago, you were one of these people in the queue waiting to come to this country from Lebanon.
Absolutely.
What was it like back then? How long a wait did you have, for example, and all of that?
Well, I had 2 cases here. One, I applied with a colleague of mine. He was able to come here. I was then a graduate in the United States. He was able to make it in 6 weeks. It took me 6 months. But 6 months now is...
it's not 6 years.
It's not 6 years. There's no question the backlog is a problem, and it would be nice to speed the process. The people dying probably waiting to get into Canada. But the issue here is not speeding the process. Nobody is against it. It's changing the process. This is really where the problem is. The process, as far as it used to be, I thought was transparent and was predictable, and it aimed at bringing in the most talented and the upper echelons of the educational strata. I mean, anybody could go, and on the computer, you could rate yourself and see whether you qualified or not. All of a sudden now, we're going into a process in which there is tremendous and wide latitude of discretionary power left to the minister and to the immigration bureaucrats. And people have no recourse, no appeal. They could be rejected without really anything. And if it's market-driven, my worry is, what market are we looking at? Markets change. Are we really going for unskilled workers? This is not where the base of success of the new economy, the knowledge-based economy.
Okay, you've raised a bunch of things here, and let's start to pull those apart if we can. James Bissett, I think I'd like to get you to start by speaking to the issue, which many people have raised, about the kind of discretion that a minister, any minister of immigration, would have to deal with certain cases in certain ways. Some people are uncomfortable with that. Tell us about your view on that.
Well, I don't think the minister really has any more discretion under these changes than she had before. What we're talking about here is a regulatory change. That is to say, the selection criteria can change by order in council. That is a regulatory change, rather than changing the act. And the ministers have always had that power. I mean, when the Liberal government back in 1967 changed the all-white immigration policy that had existed since the end of the war, they did that in 1967 by regulatory change. There was no debate in the House of Commons. It was done by an order in council. And, you know, each successive government since then has primarily used regulatory change to change the selection criteria, change the types of occupations that would get their visas quickly, and the degree of relationship that Canadians or permanent residents could sponsor.
Okay, stand by.
There's nothing really new on this.
Let's just deal with that then. David Garson, nothing really new about this, he says.
Well, there is something new about that, in the sense that if you propose change by regulation, it's usually done. It has to be overseen. There's give and take. There's debate. It's sent to the Immigration Standing Committee to be vetted. In these types of changes, the minister is basically saying, okay, look, I can make these changes for what I see to be the benefit of Canada over time and as I see fit. Now, the minister is saying that I am going to gazette my changes prior to implementation.
That's an Ottawa word. Can you tell us what that means?
Basically, it means that you're going to be pre-published so that everybody can see, oh, this is what the minister is going to be doing. But the problem with that is that doesn't guarantee debate, and it doesn't guarantee there would be any kind of input from any kind of stakeholder. So my point...
I don't,
sure.
James, I don't agree with that. I mean, there's already been considerable debate. There was some debate this afternoon in the House of Commons during question period. The Finance Committee will debate this bill, and they can spend a great deal of time on these immigration changes if they wish to.
But
so nothing has really changed.
Well, see,
you'll have a different committee, that's all.
My point is that it's being debated now prior to the passage of the bill.
But once the bill is passed?
Once the bill is passed, that's when I worry that debate will be stifled. Now, I'm not saying this minister would do that. For all I know, and I don't know this minister very well, she's a tremendous individual and very pro-immigrant. However, what my worry is that these are powers that are being vested in a government that can be carried on in the future. Ministers change, governments change.
Okay,
well, I mean, that's the basis of responsible government, really, isn't it?
My worry is that the minister is going to tied these changes to what she called the labor market, that the labor market would require unskilled workers, will bring unskilled workers. They want really people in trades, will bring people in trades. The trouble is that you can't predict this labor market so well. Labor markets change, and they change markedly. And my worry is that you bring people in here, and you're going to bring them on a premise or on a basis of conditions that have really changed. And we have a lot of...
Can I pursue that with you for a second? I mean, Canada always needs skilled workers, and it always needs unskilled workers. You need both.
Right.
So what will be so dramatically different about the future that we can't roll with that?
Well, I mean, why don't you really keep the same process, keep the same points that you really have, and if you really find that you need to change them, now we give a lot more points, say, to people who have a job or a job offer. Still in the system. We give a lot of points to people who have higher levels of education. My worry is that we're really moving away from this system. My worry is that we're really going to be targeting a labor market situation that is likely to change very abruptly. And we have backlog of people who are inside now, who came in here, can find jobs. My study of the immigrant market, labor market in Hamilton, I found that unemployment rates among immigrants here recent immigrants is 4 times the level of older immigrants, people who came before 1995, or the Canadian-born. There is now the phenomenon of having doctors driving taxis or engineers basically delivering pizza. Why don't we really spend some time trying to see to what extent can we speed the integration of these people in the labor force and make sure that what we premise the entry of people would be to a more structured, predictable, and transparent.
Let me get James Bissett to speak to that, if you would, sir.
Well, I would share those concerns if I thought for a minute that the minister was going to change the selection criteria so that only unskilled laborers came to Canada. I don't think that's the intent at all. The minister has made it pretty clear that we need skilled workers, and there are many thousands of them waiting in the backlog that she'd like to get in here quickly. What she's really saying is, and it confirms really what has just been said, that when you're dealing with immigration, the whole process can become very volatile very quickly, and you can't wait to pass acts through the House of Commons. That doesn't happen very quickly. So you have to do it by regulation. And the selection criteria and the numbers have always been regulated by order in council, not by passing bills through the House of Commons.
But just so I'm clear about the thrust of this thing, David, the gist of this is the minister wants the right to be able to take people who are down at the bottom of the queue and move them up to the top of the queue if, for example, there are high-tech mining jobs in Alberta that are going vacant because we don't have the domestic employee market to take care of it, and she wants the right to be able to say, okay, you from this country over there, come on in, we've got this job for you here.
You could argue that she has that right now, in the sense that she has provisions within the Act, within IRPA, and has been pointed... the Immigration Refugee Protection Act, okay. I apologize. And per her previous powers, throughout ministerial prerogative and things of the sort, she can do what she needs to do at this point. She doesn't necessarily have to pass a ministerial instruction provision.
No, James is shaking his head here.
Go ahead.
No, I think if, under the Act now, that if you meet all of the selection criteria, the words is then you shall be put into the backlog, you shall get your visa. That's been changed to may now, and I think quite properly so, because it gives the minister much more flexibility to manage her department. I mean, the minister is responsible for what she does. That's the whole, basis of responsible government. If she screws up or if she makes terrible mistakes, she'll be held accountable, and she'll be dropped either from the cabinet or the government will lose the next election. I don't see what's the concern about giving the minister, who's held responsible for managing her department, the power to do so adequately and effectively. Right, that's what she's asking for.
But there is a real flip side to this. Suppose these people who have really applied and staying in the queue for so many years, now they could, and this is now possible under the new legislation, that the minister would choose not to admit these people. They have no recourse, they have no appeal anymore, because no judgment has really been made as to whether to accept them or not. And these people now are really be left without any protection or any procedure or any due process to go through.
No, you've got to be careful about that, because if you look at the new legislation, it's very clear that the backlog cannot be affected by these new regulations. In other words, everybody in the backlog now who's met the requirements will be dealt with fairly and will get into Canada eventually. They can't be stopped now. They've met the requirements, they've paid their fees, and they will eventually get here.
So they are grandfathered, as it were.
They are.
What we're talking about is all future applicants for refugee.
If you made application before February 27th, you are in fact grandfathered. However, there is no indication in the new legislation how the minister proposes to deal with the people in the backlog. She has stated on the immigration website that they have been given, I think, $21 million to assist them in culling the backlog to try to expedite it, but there's no plan that I know of as to what's been going on or what is going to be going on.
James Bissett, can I just ask you to put on a political scientist's hat for a second here? There has been a lot of concern expressed about this law. Now, some of it, to be sure, is politics, and this is a we're into the midst of a silly season in Ottawa where everybody's predicting or not predicting the fall of the government at the drop of a hat. But there have been a number of sort of substantive, on the merits criticisms made about this bill. Too much power in the hands of the minister, too much favoring economic immigrants as opposed to other types. Why are so many people criticizing this if it's as good as you say it is?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, the fact of the matter is the opposition questions today were really, some of them were really quite exaggerated. I mean, you've had the liberal immigration critics saying that this is, you know, a conspiracy, that the Conservatives want to cut off immigration, stop immigration, destroy the family class. I mean, these are outrageous statements. I mean, it's a system, as I said earlier, that was bound to just collapse by the very weight of the numbers of people that are coming here. We have to have a system that can exercise some degree of control over the types and numbers of people who come. And that the system we now have does not give the minister that power. And as a result of that, the system's on the point of collapse. And it's unfair to all of those who keep paying their money and being promised a visa, but in fact, as someone mentioned on the panel, many of the people in the backlog will die before they get here.
David, mention you were talking to me before we went on the air tonight about the kind of, well, we don't want to tar with one brush the immigration consulting business, but you have seen examples out there where an immigration consultant will say to a person, what?
Well, they'll say to a person, listen, I can help you file this application, and I'll take care of it. I know people, this will go well. They're given whatever they get paid to do it. They then file the application, and 5 or 6 years later, you end up with possibly a visa, possibly not, because who knows who has applied. Now, under this new system, the minister has indicated that they still will be taking applications, and then the minister or her staff or the bureaucracy will make a determination who qualifies and who doesn't. So that doesn't stop people from filing applications that possibly won't go anywhere. In other words, they'll just sit.
My question is, though, there appears to be plenty of latitude for monkey business under the current system.
Absolutely.
You don't see any improvement of that situation with the new law?
You see, the problem with under the new law is that what can happen is if I file an application under the new law and the department decides not to consider that application, then it's shredded, it's returned, and it's not decided upon. So there's no decision, so it's not reviewable. So there's no worry about an appeal to the federal court or ask for leave to appeal to the federal court or anything like that. So basically, the bottom line is if I file an application or I've given money to somebody to file an application and it's returned, there's no indication that anything will be done on it. Under the current system, better or worse, and nobody likes this massive backlog, better or worse, it's logged in if the person qualifies, they're given a receipt and things of the sort. Under the new system, we don't know how that's going to work.
Let me get James Bissett on that. Is that your understanding of things as well?
Oh, well, no, it isn't. I mean, I'm sure David isn't one of these lawyers, but a lot of the immigration lawyers would like to see all immigration visa refusals reviewed by the Supreme Court so that the Supreme Court justices could make the decision as to whether someone should or shouldn't get the visa. That's an impossible system. And there's no suggestion in these new regulations, if they're passed, that an application submitted will be there for years or will be torn up without any decision being made. That would simply not be tolerated by any system. And so I don't think there's that concern. Under the old system, of course, you could submit an application and it may take some time before a decision is made. And in the final analysis, the decision might be no. But it's not a question, and that won't change, but it's not a question of applications going into a black hole and no one ever knowing what might happen to them.
No, it isn't a question of that, but it is a question of the, and you are correct, sir, but it is a question of the applications themselves being submitted with the minister being able to determine who the government will consider and who they won't.
But that's the proper, proper responsibility of the minister. I mean, under the system when I was there, we had a selection criteria, but you got 15 points for occupational demand. But if your occupational demand was 0, then you were refused, regardless of the number of points you got on the overall total. And it was that thermostat, that valve, that enabled us to control the numbers and the quality or the kinds of people that were coming.
But there is an issue.
So there's nothing changed.
But I don't think anybody would argue that there should be a control with regard to the number of applications that are being submitted, because nobody wants to be in a backlog and nobody wants to represent somebody that's in a backlog for many years. Frankly speaking, as a lawyer, word of mouth is how I make my living. And if I put someone in a backlog for 6 years and don't do anything for them, chances are I'm not going to do so well.
Right. But Atif, you wanted to say.
All right. Without even a lawyer or a consultant, I could right now go into the webpage of Immigration Canada, and I can test for any person prospective applicant whether they would be admitted or not. That predictability, I'm sure, is no longer there. With the new process, where all these decisions left to the discretion of the minister, you're making more opaque a system that was incredibly transparent.
That's the key here in terms of transparency. I understand the desire and the need for immigration to be able to vet applications. However, if I don't know if my application will be considered or not, because I don't know necessarily, as Mr. Sweeten pointed out, the market changes rapidly, the minister has to make decisions rapidly. So if I'm submitting an application and I have no clue whether or not it will be accepted, but I'm submitting it, and hopefully it'll be considered. If it isn't, it's sent back. Then, as I said, I can be easy prey for surreptitious individuals who would just take my application, submit it, take their money, disappear.
There's no law that's going to get past that, though, is there?
No, but the point of the matter is you can sometimes determine, if you have some web savvy, if you would qualify or not. Under the new system, you won't be able to.
You won't be able to know.
Okay.
Well, that's not. That's not evident.
Yeah.
I think quite clearly, remember, it's not just the minister, it's done by the cabinet. A decision will be made on what are the kinds of occupations that are desperately needed, and the minister will publish those, I would expect, so that people will know that. But in addition to that, she will then give instructions to her officers abroad to give those people priority in processing, so they get to the employers who need them quickly. That's not happening now.
Let me just put some numbers up here for you and our viewers to see. These are from 2006, the year most recent figures are available for. The percentage of immigrants who've come to Canada, why do they come here? Economic purposes, almost 55%. Family reunification, which has been talked about much in the last few weeks, 28%. Refugees, almost 13%. Other, little over 4%, for a total of more than 250,000 people. It's 0.8% of our population. Atif, what do these numbers tell us about the kind of people that want to come to this country?
Well, the question about it, and I'm not going to argue against linking these immigrants to the possibility of their absorption, integration. But what these show that there are many different purposes. We ultimately don't want just workers, we want citizens. And we want citizens that would qualify as good examples and would integrate well within this society. And my worry with the new system is that we are making it too dependent on the market conditions, and we're not giving enough weight. And I think the opposition had every right, and they have every justification here, to worry about being totally market-driven and corporate-driven in the following sense. That if corporations would come now and have the ear of the minister, they could basically demand that we don't have enough unskilled workers. The trouble is, and there is now incontrovertible evidence, that increase in the supply of immigrants have depressed wages in Canada. To what extent would this minister would be totally immune to the kind of exigencies and demands of business that would be in the best interest to really reduce the wages of workers?
Let's get James to comment on that, if you would.
Well, you know, there are three streams usually, as you've mentioned, the market stream, the family stream, and the humanitarian stream. But even now, if you look carefully at that 50-some% who supposedly are selected because they are in the skilled category, half of those are relatives. If you look at the overall total, you'll really, and analyze it carefully, you'll find that it's only between 20 and 25% of the immigrants that come in any one year who are coming in because they meet market qualifications. The rest of them are family, or they're coming for humanitarian reasons, or they're refugees. And none of that latter group are looked at in terms of whether they're going to make a success of it in Canada. They're not looked at in terms of their skills, their education, their occupations. And so, you know, the professor is quite right to be concerned about the market and the fact that too many may be coming in because they meet market qualifications. But they have to go a very long way to even get close to 50% under the present system.
All right, there is another worry, and this I draw on the conditions and the experiences of Europe, and even countries like New Zealand and Australia, but particularly Europe, because they went completely to market-driven. They ended up basically with a major divide. they got these hordes of people coming from North Africa and other parts of the world, or Turkey, as guest labor, and now they're paying the price for being such a market-driven situation. To what extent do we really see in this new law that has been put forward here any safeguards that this would not really be the case?
James?
Well, I mean, that's the broader question. I think, however, it's pretty clear from what the minister has said that the primary reason for her bringing in these regulations is to try and get the skilled workers that are in the process into Canada quickly. That's her major concern. I would see this as a first step to fairly major reform of the immigration system in Canada, where we try and get back to the point where we have about 60% of the immigrants coming in the skilled worker category, and about 40% between the family and the humanitarian. That's how it used to be, but now it's the other way around. About 80% are coming in without any selection whatsoever because of their capability of entering into the labor force.
Okay,
and that's why you do find that over 52% of the immigrants that have come to Canada since the 90s are living below the poverty level.
Well, can you speak to the point that the Premier of Ontario made the other day, which is, you know, his family came over here from Ireland with essentially nothing. They didn't speak the language. They didn't have a dime to, you know, 2 nickels to rub together, as it was. And yet, I mean, here they are a couple of generations later, and, you know, the oldest son of this family is the Premier of the province. You know, well, his concern was that people like his forebears will not get a fair shake under the new system.
No, but the world has changed, you know, since his forebears were there. When they came from Ireland to escape the potato famine, they were probably very poorly educated and had really no high skills. But we didn't need immigrants who were highly educated and highly skilled in those days. What we needed was general laborers, farmers, mining, people who work in the mines or in the forestry, in those kind of occupations. Those people wouldn't have a hope of getting here today if they did apply, and if they did get here, they'd be out of work and unemployable.
Let's
talk I mean, these people who keep telling us that we're countries of immigrants, and you know, my father and my grandfather certainly were in that category, but you know, you can't apply that that standard by, under today's conditions.
Okay, Atif.
Yeah, I mean, there is really 2 points here. I mean, why do we really bring immigrants? There are really 2 important reasons that we have somehow did not really put forward on the table. First, all the population that increase in Canada is 0.8%, and actually will be 100%.
We're not replacing ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And the second one is in the labor force. We're aging too quickly. The population pyramid is totally upside down. It is totally inverted. So there are really issues here beyond the market. It has something to do with the demography, has something to do with the aging of the population, has something to do with fecundity and other aspects of these things. I hate to see a program that is so skewed towards one single aspect that predominates and does not really take into account or sensitive enough for the very basis of what this immigration is all about.
James says it's skewed the other way right now. We've gone too far in the other direction, and he wants the pendulum brought more back to where he believes it traditionally has been and should be.
No, I thought we really made a major move when we really changed the laws down with the liberals at 8 times, not defense of the liberals here, when we basically made this immigration on a predictable, transparent, and targeting the cream of the crop. And this is the knowledge-based economy. This is what globalization is going through. This is really the base of success. And what I'm really worried about is we're trying to really recreate some base of success based on cheap labor or semi-skilled labor. I don't think we're going to work.
I know David Garson's an immigration lawyer, but he does read the papers and he does follow politics, and I want to ask about some of the politics around this. We have heard a great deal of criticism about the proposed changes that the minister is bringing forward, Dianne Findlay. And we've heard some of it in our discussion here tonight about how some liberals are predicting that we will see no more family reunification if this bill goes forward. Would you grant, and I appreciate you have some legitimate criticisms of this bill, would you grant that the opposition is playing some politics with this as well, trying to embarrass the government over it?
No, I would not, of course.
Okay, so
absolutely that's the case.
You'll grant that there's some, like, maybe the government ought to, maybe not be brought down about this. Maybe the Conservatives are putting it in the budget in order to embarrass the Liberals on this. There is all that going on.
And absolutely that's the case. I mean, why else would you put it in a budget bill, realistically speaking? It's there. the Liberals are in a very interesting position in the sense that they can try to bring down the government over immigration provisions in a budget bill. They're going to make as many enemies as friends if they try to do that. And I'm not sure, and I think that those who are more knowledgeable than I would say that they are ready for an election at this point.
James Bissett, do you believe that if politics were taken out of the equation, and I know that's impossible to do, but all things being equal, would it be better to try to get the proper treatment of this subject if this were not a part of the budget bill, but rather were treated as an immigration bill on its own?
I think it would have been better 4 or 5 years ago, but the situation now has reached crisis point. As I said at the beginning, the system is breaking down. It's about to collapse, and something has to be done about it, and has to be done quickly. If they introduced an immigration bill now in the House to discuss these issues, it would probably never get through.
So it's kind of okay to play chicken with the budget bill in that case?
I think so, definitely.
Atif?
No, I don't think so. I think the situation is now based on a wrong conceptualization of what the real problem is. The problem is the process. Speeding the process is no problem. I mean, but let's keep the process, not just in the to meet a crisis or to deal with a crisis or to deal with a backlog. We're basically trying to change the process. I think within the same process, we could speed the process of the backlog. Why should we really go? And it's worse than this, is they're playing politics in the way that...
Who's playing politics?
All parties,
but
particularly the government, by embedding this bill into the budget. Why can't...
But James is saying you'll embark on a debate that'll go years and years and years if you do it just as an immigration bill. If you do it on the budget, it'll get passed soon because no one wants to bring this House down right now.
However, the
Liberals don't.
The minister does have powers to redirect funds and resources in the immigration system such as it is. I mean, first of all, the backlog should be tackled. I think everybody agrees with that. It's not fair. It's not appropriate. We aren't getting a reputation in the world that is scintillating with regard to keeping people there 5 or 6 years. And as I said, most of those people may have moved on to Australia, New Zealand, the United States, or something of the sort. Secondly, if the minister wants to deal with this on this very, very important issue, and I commend her for doing that, as I said, she has powers that she can redirect and do resources with that regard.
Let me read one thing here, because we quoted Carol Gore in the interview with the minister, and she did a piece on this in the Toronto Star a few days ago, and I'll read another excerpt from this. Michael, let's bring this up if we can here. If visa offices cut off new applications, Carol writes, the staff could tackle the 6-year accumulation of paperwork in their files. If the minister instructed them as a first priority to discard all applications from individuals who've died, immigrated elsewhere, or decided against coming to Canada, the pile would shrink appreciably. David, you're referring to this a second ago. But if clearing the backlog is Finley's objective, why does she need the power to bar certain types of immigrants? Why does she seek the authority to reject applicants who have already met Canada's admission criteria? The sweeping nature of the changes proposed in Bill C-50 suggests something bigger than house cleaning is afoot. Okay, James Bissett, is there something bigger than house cleaning afoot here?
No, I don't think there is. You know, I mean, look, people have the idea that we can accept, you know, any number of immigrants because we're being told that they help with the aging, which of course they don't. And we've been told that, you know, our population is withering away, which it isn't. I mean, even if we took only 80,000 immigrants a year, net figure, our population would continue to grow until about 2026, and then it would gradually decline, but it would take 600 years for it to get down to the 18 million level. So, I mean, a lot of this is a lot of nonsense. There's no great conspiracy here. The system is on the point of collapse. She's taking sensible measures to try and stop that from happening, and she's not affecting the backlog other than that she's promised that she will deal with it fairly and clean it up as quickly as she can.
So tell me this then, why are we taking 250,000 new immigrants into this country annually if we don't have to have that many?
Well, because all political parties will argue they want immigration. They keep telling us that we need 250,000 a year, although nobody can tell you why they have that figure. It's a figure that it's just been plucked out of the air, really. There's no economist that I know of that will say that just because you have a larger population.
I can name several economists.
I got a professor of economics right here.
Yeah,
so hang on.
I mean, there's several economists.
James is saying we could get away in this country for 600 years with 80,000 instead of 250,000. What's magic about 250,000?
He has a point, but to some extent. Let's see. and deconstruct the argument here. First of all, 250,000, they don't stay here, all of them. There is really a figure of about 80,000 who leave every year. And therefore, the net that remains here is probably less than the 250, 150, 160,000. But this is the number that is absolutely necessary to compensate for the population reduction in number of children and birth rates, and for making sure that our pyramid and our pension system remains intact.
David?
No, I would agree. I mean, we always look at immigration has always been a very personal issue. People will come into my office and say, well, how come they get to come here and they don't get to come here, and this person's very hardworking, and how come that person who isn't? The bottom line is we wouldn't be taking immigrants if we didn't need immigrants. I mean, we can structure it any way you'd like. I'm not a university professor, and I didn't run the immigration system. But what I do know is that the immigrants that I've seen come into the country, the people that I've represented, have been contributing factors. And I think for the most part, people do recognize that Canada is a very large nation with a very small population who wants to compete on the world stage. And to do so, we need people who can produce, who are technologically savvy, and who will contribute.
I think
well, and we're not getting enough of those kinds of people, and that's the problem. As I said, only about 20% of them are selected because they are going to make a contribution to the labor force. And that, I think, is part of what's wrong with the system. But the points we're arguing now, whether we need 250,000 or 80,000, are beside the point that we started here. We're talking about a minister who boasts and is proud of the fact that, as she put it, we've taken 446,000 new immigrants last year. She includes temporary workers in that. But there's no government political party that I know of that isn't a hard drive to get more and more people. And I'm just saying that most of your economists and a lot of your demographers say that they're not necessarily needed to improve, you know, the per capita income of the average Canadian.
Gentlemen, I've got to jump in. Forgive me, I've got to jump in because that's our time. James Bissett, the former director of the Canadian Immigration Service in Ottawa. We're grateful to have you on the program tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Atif Kubersi and David Garson here in the studio. We're glad you're alongside for the ride as well.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.